It's been a while since I've talked about one of my favorite pop culture icons of the 1920s, Baby Peggy. That was because I didn't have much else to say. I had already made a short video about her, and a tribute video after she unfortunately passed away 2 years ago, as well as some articles from fan magazines. But I was recently able to read her autobiography for the first time, something I should have done while making my first video about her, but couldn't at the time. Her story is really interesting, and I loved getting to know more details about her career. She appropriately dedicated a large portion of the book to the 1920s, so I want to share some of what I learned with all of you, and also throw in some details from magazines and other information I happened to find. So I guess this is an update video of sorts, because I want to do justice to her short but glorious career as a star of the silent screen, and tell her story as she told it. Just a quick note before we start, that Baby Peggy was a stage name, and she later went by the name Diana Serra Cary, and I'll flip-flop between those names a bit, but just know that they're one and the same. So, without further ado, here's Baby Peggy, revisited. Baby Peggy's acting career began before she had even turned 2 years old. In 1921, her mother, against her husband's wishes, went to a movie studio with her toddling daughter. A director, Fred Fishback, happened to see Peggy sitting obediently and silently without a toy or anything to do. Impressed by this discipline, he offered Peggy's mother to cast her daughter in a comedy short. She said yes, but secretly worried about what her husband would say. He had the habit of privately complaining about mothers who seek to put their children in the movies. Peggy's early shorts were made by Century Films. The Century Film Corporation had a small studio located on Poverty Row, the section of Hollywood that was mostly occupied by B studios and other independent studios. During Baby Peggy's first audition at 19 months old, she was afraid of a random dog Fishback's assistant had let into the room as a test, discouraging him from casting her with Century's famous Brownie the Wonder Dog, a mixed-breed terrier that had previously worked with Charlie Chaplin a few years before. When Peggy's mother told her husband about the whole story, he seemed more angry that the studio people thought his daughter was afraid of a little dog. For Peggy's second audition, her father took her, and she interacted with Brownie without any trouble. Her father claimed it was because he had told her not to be afraid, and she obeyed him diligently. According to Diana's autobiography, the first short she made was titled Playmates, though it was not the first to be released. The original amount of money offered Peggy was $5, but her father successfully negotiated it up to $7.50, which matched his salary as Tom Mix's stunt double, and would offset the amount he would lose to take a day off to take Peggy. Julius and Abe Stern, the brothers who founded and ran Century Comedies, offered Baby Peggy a 7-year, $75 contract after seeing Playmates. Peggy's father, Jack, quit his job at Mixville in order to push Peggy further in her burgeoning film career. Throughout her early career at Century, she was known as One-Shot Peggy for her impeccable ability to do a scene in one take, something the penny-pinching small studio appreciated. This was when Peggy Jean Montgomery became Baby Peggy. In early 1922, Brownie the Wonder Dog died, possibly spelling the end of the Baby Peggy Brownie comedy series. But this also opened up the opportunity for Peggy to become a star in her own right, going solo that is, which certainly had its own risks. Brownie shorts continued to be made with a look-alike dog, so if things didn't work out, there was always the option to keep making run-of-the-mill shorts. But for her next series of shorts, Baby Peggy would be the only main star. But that didn't mean things would be easier. In fact, it was the opposite. In the early 1920s, there weren't really any enforced regulations for the well-being of child actors, and Peggy had already experienced dangerous situations on set. Take, for example, her 1921 short, Seashore Shapes. Peggy was to be held in the mouth of a trained dog and dipped in ocean water for a few seconds. Apparently, it ended up being more than a few seconds, and she breathed in a lot of water and blacked out. That take was kept, and another wasn't necessary. In another instance, Peggy was wired into the saddle of a goat in the bed of a truck. The driver of the truck was a young teenage boy who was hired to drive with Peggy and the goat in the back. He ended up speeding much faster than he was told, and one of the wires holding Peggy in snapped, and she was flung over the bed, dangling outside. In yet another instance, Peggy was hit by a young bicyclist during filming. The young man had somehow broken through the blockade put up to prevent random people from disturbing the filming session. Apparently unaware that he had hit anything, the bicyclist kept pedaling. Peggy's clothes had gotten stuck somewhere on the bike, and she was dragged for a distance, scraping against the gravel all along the way. Peggy also worked with various animals with violent temperaments. There was a donkey who viciously attacked an actress on set and ripped her clothes off with its teeth. A chimpanzee named Joe Martin, who Peggy had worked with for one short, ended up attacking a woman at the studio and was then beaten to death by his trainer. That same trainer was shortly afterward killed by an elephant, who apparently had a 2-decade-long grudge against him. Peggy was a witness to the incident. The elephant was quickly shot and killed. Things were not fantastic at home either. Diana did not paint her father in the best light. He was a strict disciplinarian, and he sheltered his wife so much that he demanded that she stay Victorian in looks and attitude. When Peggy's mother, Marion, got her hair bobbed and put into a permanent wave, he became very angry. He also used Peggy's money from early in her career to buy 2 very expensive cars and a large ranch in the San Fernando Valley, complete with horses. The house was near writer Edgar Rice Burroughs' house, the man who wrote Tarzan, whose house was appropriately named Tarzana. Not long afterward, Peggy's father, Jack, then sold that house to buy another big house in Beverly Hills. Back then, there was also no protection for a child actor's finances from their parents. And worst of all, while he had been working as a stunt double, Jack had gone to a very cheap dentist to get a tooth extracted. When the operation was botched, the wound became very infected and drove Jack to near insanity. The pain was so great that he pulled out his revolver and threatened to kill his entire family and himself. In a possibly made-up story, when a writer for a movie magazine asked her about her punishment for misbehavior, Peggy pulled down her pants to expose her bare backside to show the marks her father had given her. The reason I say that the credibility of this story is questionable is because later in life, Diana said that she never remembered her father beating her at the studio even once, and that she was not driven by fear to be successful. Though this rumor about severe punishment might be due to the fact that her father frequently yelled out threats of a beating, though Diana claimed that these were mutually understood to be empty threats. But let's also not forget that at this time, Peggy was only about 3 or 4 years old, right on the fringe of when most people begin to have any explicit memories. We can spend hours theorizing about this, but it doesn't really matter much for the purpose of this video. And neither did Diana portray her mother in a flattering way. If she hadn't been before, her daughter's fame had made her prudish and aware of class. She also developed expensive habits during Baby Peggy's peak of success. But she was also helpless under the strict supervision of her temperamental and overprotective husband. The two of them would argue incessantly, to the severe detriment of their 2 daughters. Peggy's sister, Louise, was also negatively affected by the sudden fame of her sister. Peggy got all the attention. Peggy got all the gifts. Peggy made all the money for her parents. Understandably, Louise was hurt by often being ignored by her parents, and her famous sister was usually too busy to play. While it doesn't seem like there was ever a dramatic falling out between the 2 girls, the relationship was at least somewhat strained by all of this. But Peggy's fame also brought difficulties for her. Despite the California child labor laws requiring 2 hours of schooling every day, even for child actors, Peggy's education was lacking to say the least. She had a tutor for a short time around 1922 and 1923 who helped her with the bare essentials. But after that tutor was dismissed, Peggy had no formal education for about 2 years. Not to mention that a lot of responsibility was placed upon her tiny shoulders. She became her family's only source of income, and more responsibility meant more pressure that a 4-year-old should not have. With the immense popularity of the new series of Baby Peggy shorts, her father demanded an increase of the $75 a week salary, and it was launched up to $500 a week. Many of these new shorts featured fairy tales, and more interestingly, parodies of recent films, including a cancelled film parodying Harold Lloyd's 1922 film Grandma's Boy that was titled Grandma's Girl. Baby Peggy also did film impersonations of big-name celebrities such as Rudolph Valentino, Mae Murray, and even played a vamp character resembling Pola Negri. These Hollywood inside jokes proved very popular as a general trend at the time. But as the quick pace cranking out all these shorts began to take its toll on the crew, and many actors began to leave, Peggy's father was able to get her out of her contract at Century, and into a new contract with Carl Laemmle at Universal. While there, Peggy received better amenities in pretty much every way. A better studio, and a better dressing room among them. But still, there was danger. In her first real dramatic role, as well as her first starring role in a feature film titled The Darling of New York, Peggy played an immigrant girl who, in one scene, was to escape from a burning building. This was done by actually setting fire to a set with Peggy inside, knowing that one-shot Peggy could do it all in one take. However, the one exit on the set where she was supposed to escape was also set ablaze somehow, unbeknownst to the director and her father. Instead, she found her way out through a window. That take was apparently kept, because the expensive scene could not be reshot, so it shows a child truly escaping death. The reel containing this harrowing scene is the only surviving piece of the whole film. In September 1923, Peggy was offered a $1.5 million a year contract by Sol Lester of Principal Pictures, with an additional $500,000 bonus. Of course, this surprising offer was accepted, something which outraged some working men, as this comic strip perfectly demonstrates. This negative reaction to giving a child so much money was so prevalent that Lester had to come out and call the whole thing a fabrication, even though it most certainly wasn't. For this lucrative contract, Baby Peggy was called the $1 Million Baby. For Peggy's 5th birthday in October of 1923, Lester planned out a huge itinerary for personal appearances and promotional products. Peggy was sent to New York to tour orphanages, visit toy stores, and even made a short speech on the radio, which I truly wish I could listen to, and also a line of Baby Peggy dolls. Deals were also set up to put her face on a wide range of products. At this point, Baby Peggy was on top of the world, being featured in film magazines all over the place, and her films getting double billed with such illustrious Hollywood celebrities as Charlie Chaplin. She made the rounds with the elites of pop culture, being featured in photographs with celebrities ranging from Jack Dempsey to Irene Castle. For the moment, Peggy was riding high, though all of it would naturally have seemed normal for her, since she had been a movie star for a majority of her 5 years. However, Peggy's parents' ignorance of how to handle money had its consequences. For one, her father had hired a business manager after the move to Universal. The manager ended up stealing $90,000 of their money and hightailing it to Brazil. Later, upon arriving from her in-person tour in support of her feature Captain January in 1924, it was discovered that her grandfather, on her father's side, who had been made vice president of Baby Peggy's finances, had withdrawn nearly $1 million from the account and ran away. It was also discovered later that the grandfather, recently divorced from his wife, had run off with another woman, who was the heiress of a large fortune. To make things worse, much of the china, silver, and crystal had disappeared from the Montgomery home. With the release of Peggy's next feature, Helen's Babies, where she appeared with a very young Clara Bow, she went on another nationwide tour, though smaller than the one for Captain January. During this trip, she attended the 1924 Democratic National Convention and was pictured alongside Franklin D. Roosevelt, who was recovering from his recent affliction with polio. This was to be the last time Baby Peggy would really be in the limelight. The problems began when Sol Lester told Peggy's father that Captain January had failed to make a profit. Jack found this confusing because he and Peggy had traveled the country, going to countless premieres of the movie where full houses packed the theaters. Then after the tour for Helen's Babies, Lester said the same thing, no profits. Jack was very suspicious of Sol Lester, who he thought was keeping 2 books to hide the profits from him. Jack dramatically canceled Baby Peggy's contract with Principal Pictures. And to make matters worse, Peggy lost her 2 front baby teeth, a severe setback for a child star in her position. But that would be the least of her career problems. Jack's abrupt cancellation of Baby Peggy's contract had far more widespread consequences. According to Diana, her father's rash decisions to leave Sol Lester, as well as Carl Laemmle at Universal, gave many in the industry the impression that he was anti-Semitic. Since all of the major studios and many of the minor ones were run by Jewish men, including Adolf Zucker, the Warner Brothers, and Marcus Lowe, this was a virtual death sentence for any work with them. Diana's autobiography seems to give the impression that her father certainly had some degree of prejudice towards Jews, but that it was his fiery temperament and overly prideful nature, rather than any anti-Semitism, that caused the fatal friction with studio heads. And just like that, Baby Peggy had to return to the small independent studios on Poverty Row, and got a job working on the short April Fool for Chadwick Studio in 1926, back down to $150 a week. The family had to get rid of some of their more expensive possessions, including their 2 horses. Peggy's father, Jack, had to get back into work as a cowboy extra in westerns, but soon after, he suffered a burst appendix. His appendectomy left him physically and mentally injured, but he was slightly re-energized again when he received a call from a bootlegging buddy in Texas who knew a vaudeville manager that needed a new performer on short notice. With his extra job no longer possible and Peggy's career on the ropes, he accepted, and the family moved down south. But Baby Peggy had left quite a legacy for such a young child by this point. At 6 years old, she had appeared in nearly 150 shorts, 3 feature films, and made some appearances in other films. The decline of her film career was very fast, and she had to adjust to being a stage performer. Unexpectedly, that one-night stand-in vaudeville performance in Fort Worth, Texas would turn into a long-term engagement when a high-profile vaudeville agent offered a contract of $1,500 a week. Peggy would perform on stage across many cities in the southern states. Here's a random little anecdotal story from these years in vaudeville. Peggy's sister, Louise, entered a Charleston dance contest and got second place. The first place winner was Virginia McGrath, better known by her later stage name Ginger Rogers. Among other vaudeville stars they rubbed elbows with during these years were Elsie Janis and the Hilton Sisters, a performing Siamese twin act. Vaudeville provided an income, but there was a ceiling to upward mobility. Once again, Peggy was the only breadwinner in the family. During her vaudeville years, Peggy continued a tradition that she had previously done in film, imitating celebrities. While she had imitated other movie stars in film, she imitated vaudeville stars on stage, Harry Lauder and Ethel Barrymore among the targets. Soon, Peggy was making a very comfortable salary at around $3,000 a week, but a few more curveballs were about to be thrown. First was the advent of talkies. In the immediate aftermath of the success of some of the first talkies, vaudeville was forced to share time with them, appearing as introductory acts to movies before mostly being replaced by them, leading to a sharp decline for vaudeville as a whole. Then came the big Wall Street crash on October 29, 1929, the same exact day that Peggy turned 11. By then, the Montgomery family was living on a ranch in Wyoming. It had been Jack's dream, and provided a possible alternative source of income. This was important since the death of vaudeville seemed very close. Here, they lived with virtually no modern conveniences, though the idea was that once the money started coming in, the ranch would be gradually upgraded. To make the ranch profitable for the future, Jack had secured investors. When the crash hit, he lost one investor when he took the money and ran, and another committed suicide. And it was on this uncertain note that Peggy and her family ended the 1920s. To briefly summarize the rest of Peggy's life, the family struggled to get by for a number of years. There was an attempt by her parents to get Peggy back into the movies, even sending her to the famous Lawler School, where she was classmates with such child star luminaries as Mickey Rooney and Judy Garland. This stint, however, ultimately proved fruitless. For a long time, Peggy struggled to merge her Baby Peggy self with her current self. To her, they were separate entities, though some people kept reminding her that she was Baby Peggy and tried to capitalize on her past star power against her wishes, including her first husband. She sometimes used the name Diana as a pen name to hide her past fame, before using it permanently. Sarah was what she chose for her confirmation name when she entered the Catholic Church, and the last name, Cary, came from her second and final marriage, so this made her new name Diana Serra Cary. After her life normalized and silent film was all but forgotten, Diana was able to slowly reconcile with her days as a child star, and her identity crisis was eventually solved. When interest in silent film finally had a resurgence, she embraced her long-ago fame. She became a writer and historian, and eventually the darling of a niche group of silent film fans around the world. At the end of her life, she was the last surviving silent film star. She died on February 24th, 2020, at the age of 101. I really hope you enjoyed this video. Like I said at the beginning, Baby Peggy's story is just fascinating to me, and a lot of videos on YouTube made about her are often very short, probably because the information online is often very general. I think Diana's autobiography is a really reliable source, and a fascinating glimpse into the 1920s film world. And the fact that she was a trained writer really made the book a lot more engaging than others as well. I will always find an excuse to talk about Baby Peggy, but I want this to be my main video on her, using her own memoirs as a guide. And I'll find more Baby Peggy related articles to read through in the future, don't you worry. Well, that's all for now all you sheiks and gals out there, but stay tuned for more tales from the Jazz Age.